I didn't begin this investigation believing that marble could be molded like clay. Honestly, the idea sounded absurd. Everyone learns the same story in art history. Marble is carved. Sculptors take a solid block of stone and slowly remove material using chisels, hammers, and abrasives. The process is slow, unforgiving, and permanent. One mistake, and the entire sculpture is ruined. Take Michelangelo, for example. According to the traditional account, he spent roughly 4 years carving the famous statue of David. The narrative is well established: patient craftsmanship, masterful anatomy, and endless hours of careful work. That explanation seems reasonable until you start looking closer, not at the overall shape of the sculpture, but at the details. Look at the veins in the arms. Not marble veins, the human veins carved into the stone. They bulge naturally beneath the skin. The muscles tighten and stretch with anatomical precision. The surface of the marble almost appears alive. Then there are the draperies in some sculptures. Thin layers of marble seem to behave like fabric. Cloth clings to the body beneath, revealing every contour as if the stone were transparent. Lace-like veils drape across faces while still allowing the features underneath to remain visible. And this leads to a troubling question. How do you carve negative space beneath a surface? How do you create the illusion of depth and softness in a material that has absolutely no flexibility? Marble doesn't bend. It doesn't compress. It doesn't forgive errors. If a sculptor miscalculates even slightly with a chisel, the result is irreversible. A delicate vein becomes a groove. A thin fold breaks away completely. Yet when we examine these masterpieces, we don't see hesitation. We don't see repairs. We don't see trial and error. We see perfection. The more sculptures I examined, the more the same pattern appeared again and again. At first, I assumed these were rare examples of artistic genius. But after cataloguing them systematically across museums, historical records, and architectural sites, I realized something unsettling. This level of precision was not rare. It appeared repeatedly across different centuries and different artists. Consider the work of Gian Lorenzo Bernini. One of his most famous sculptures is the Rape of Proserpina. If you look closely at the statue, something extraordinary happens. The fingers of Pluto press into Proserpina's marble thind. The stone appears to compress like flesh. The skin dimples under pressure exactly the way real muscle tissue behaves, but marble does not compress. So how did Bernini calculate the geometry of compressed skin and reproduce it so convincingly in stone? One wrong strike of the chisel should have destroyed the illusion completely. Yet, it works perfectly. And it isn't the only example. In Apollo and Daphne, Bernini depicts a moment of transformation from myth. Daphne's fingers turn into leaves while bark spreads across her skin. Tiny marble leaves emerge from fingertips with botanical precision. Stone becomes wood. Flesh becomes bark. Motion becomes frozen in time. And that's when the investigation becomes impossible to ignore, because the deeper you look into these sculptures, the more they begin to challenge the simple explanation we've all been taught, that they were created using nothing more than chisels and patience. The deeper I looked, the more one sculpture kept appearing in discussions about impossible marble: the Veiled Christ, located in Naples. This sculpture is attributed to Giuseppe San Martino and dated to 1753. At first glance, it appears simple. the body of Christ lying beneath a thin funeral shroud. But the moment you stand in front of it, something feels wrong in the most fascinating way. The veil covering Christ's body looks transparent, not symbolically transparent, not artistically suggested, actually transparent. You can clearly see the nose, the eyelids, the lips, even subtle contours of the face beneath the cloth. Visitors often reach out instinctively, believing the veil must be a separate piece of fabric placed over the sculpture. But it isn't. The veil and the body beneath it were carved from a single block of marble. The stone behaves like delicate cloth. It stretches across the chest, dips gently into the hollow of the throat, gathers around the knees, and drapes across the body with the kind of gravitational realism we expect from real fabric where the cloth folds. The marble becomes thicker and appears opaque. Where the veil stretches thin across the face, the features underneath become visible. It obeys the physics of fabric perfectly, which leads to an unsettling question. How do you carve something that doesn't exist? The veil is an illusion created entirely from solid marble. To achieve the effect of transparency, the sculptor would have needed to calculate two different surfaces at the same time. The body beneath the cloth and the cloth itself. That means removing just enough marble so that the eye perceives depth, layering and translucency without ever breaking the thin surface above dot. And there's another problem. To create the indentation where the veil sinks slightly into Christ's open mouth, the sculptor would need to shape the surface beneath the veil before the veil itself existed. The work would require a sequence of carving that moves both forward and backward through the material. In other words, the sculptor would need to anticipate the final geometry of multiple hidden layers before removing the outer stone. That level of planning would be incredibly complex, even with modern digital modeling. Yet this sculpture was supposedly completed in the mid-18th century, and the veiled Christ is not alone. Similar illusions appear in other works. Some sculptures show thin marble veils clinging to faces. Others display skin so detailed you can see veins rising beneath the surface. At first glance, these might seem like isolated masterpieces, but when you start cataloging them across history, a pattern emerges. These techniques appear suddenly during specific periods, especially during the Renaissance and Baroque eras, and then gradually disappear. Even more curious, sculptors working today with diamond-tipped tools, power drills, and computer-guided equipment rarely attempt such illusions, not because they lack talent, but because the techniques used to achieve them are poorly documented. The further I searched into historical records, the more I expected to find detailed explanations, workshop manuals, technical sketches, apprenticeship guides describing exactly how these effects were produced. Instead, I found something strange: admiration everywhere, but almost no technical instruction. The silence in the historical record becomes even stranger when we look at the tools that sculptors were supposed to use for thousands of years. The basic stone carving toolkit stayed almost the same. Sculptors worked with chisels, wooden mallets, metal rasps, simple hand drills, and abrasive sand for polishing. The tools used by Michelangelo were not very different from the tools used by Roman craftsmen more than 1,500 years earlier. The same materials, the same methods, the same physical limits, yet the sculptures themselves became far more complex. If you compare a typical Roman portrait bust with later works like Apollo and Daphne by Gian Lorenzo Bernini, the difference is dramatic. Roman busts are impressive. They show accurate faces, realistic expressions, and detailed hair, but they are mostly still and calm. Bernini's sculptures are different. They capture movement at the exact moment something is changing. In Apollo and Daphne, the figure of Daphne is transforming into a tree. Her fingers stretch into thin leaves. Her hair becomes branches. Bark spreads across her skin. Every stage of the transformation appears frozen in time. Some of the marble leaves are incredibly thin and delicate. One small mistake while carving could have broken them completely, yet the sculpture survived. And it is not the only example. When historians map the timeline of great marble sculptures, something unusual appears. The most extraordinary works seem to cluster in certain places and time periods. Renaissance Italy, Baroque Rome, and earlier masterpieces from the ancient world. For example, the famous sculpture Laocoon and his Sons, discovered in Rome in 1506, shows three figures struggling with giant serpents. The anatomy, tension, and movement captured in stone are astonishing. Another example is the Winged Victory of Samothrace, where marble appears to behave like wind-blown fabric. The same kind of incredible stonework also appears far beyond Europe. At the Taj Mahal, thin marble screens called yali turn solid stone into delicate geometric lace at Luxor Temple. Hieroglyphs carved into hard granite remain sharp and precise across massive walls. In China, the Longmen grottos contained thousands of Buddhist statues carved directly into cliffs, and in India, the Kailasa temple was carved downward from a single rock mountain. Builders removed hundreds of thousands of tons of stone to reveal an entire temple complex. Different cultures, different continents, different centuries, yet again and again we see the same level of astonishing stone craftsmanship. The traditional explanation is simple. Human creativity solved similar problems in similar ways, but when you study the details closely, the similarities begin to feel strange. The same kinds of precision, the same thin stone structures, the same near impossible details, almost as if some knowledge was shared or inherited. And that raises a deeper question. If these techniques once existed, why do they appear suddenly in history, only to fade away just as mysteriously? As the investigation goes deeper, some researchers began looking for explanations outside traditional art history, not because they wanted to reject the official story, but because certain details didn't seem to fit. One idea appears again and again in historical accounts and field reports: the possibility that stone was not always carved in a fully solid state. There are scattered stories from explorers and researchers describing substances that could soften stone, at least temporarily. For example, Percy Fawcett recorded accounts from South America about a liquid that could make stone behave more like clay. According to these reports, the material could be shaped and then harden again later. Similarly, Hiram Bingham, known for bringing global attention to Machu Picchu, also heard local stories describing plants that could alter the structure of stone. Decades later, in 1983, a Catholic priest claimed he had experimented with plant extracts that could soften certain types of rock. However, he reportedly could not solve the problem of turning the material back into a stable solid. One plant name appears repeatedly in these discussions: Jochopy, sometimes linked to Ephedra andina. There is no widely accepted scientific proof that such a process works the way these stories describe, but the idea continues to surface at the same time. Other researchers approached the mystery from a different angle. Some studies of stone surfaces, especially in South America, have suggested signs of vitrification, a process where material is exposed to extremely high heat and becomes partially glass-like. Researchers such as Jan-Peter de Jong, Christopher Jordan, and Jesus Gamara examined stone walls in the Cusco region and reported unusual surface characteristics in Egypt. Engineer Christopher Dunn studied ancient monuments and argued that some cuts and finishes show a level of precision that is difficult to achieve even with modern tools, across different regions and different decades. Researchers kept returning to the same conclusion. The official explanation may not fully describe how these works were created, but here is where things become more complicated. None of these alternative ideas have been widely confirmed. Many of the claims remain untested, unreplicated, or debated within academic communities. Some reports were never followed up. Some studies were not funded. Some conclusions were dismissed as speculation. This creates a strange situation. On one side, we have sculptures and structures that clearly exist, objects that can be measured, analyzed, and observed. On the other side, we have explanations that feel incomplete, and alternative theories that remain uncertain. And between those two sides, there is a noticeable gap, a gap filled with unanswered questions. Because whether we look at marble sculptures in Europe, stone walls in South America, or temples carved from mountains in India, the same question keeps returning. Are we fully understanding the methods that were used? Or are we still missing something important? As I continued searching for answers, I expected to find detailed records, workshop notes, technical manuals, step-by-step descriptions of how these sculptures were actually made. Instead, I found something unexpected, plenty of admiration, very little explanation. We have letters and contracts from Michelangelo. We know about his commissions, his deadlines, even his disputes with patrons. But when it comes to the exact techniques he used to shape marble at that level of precision, the record is surprisingly thin. The same is true for Gian Lorenzo Bernini. His workshop produced some of the most complex sculptures in history, including large-scale works like the Fountain of the Four Rivers. This fountain alone contains multiple massive figures, animals, flowing rock forms, and integrated water systems, all completed in a short time frame. According to historical records, it was finished in less than 2 years, with hand tools, in marble, with almost no margin for error. Or take Apollo and Daphne again. Bernini completed it in about 3 years, while also working on other commissions. The sculpture captures a transformation in progress: human skin turning into tree bark, fingers becoming leaves. The transition zones alone should be extremely difficult to execute. A sculptor would be carving areas where the form changes rapidly, where the thickness of the material varies, and where a single mistake could destroy the entire effect. Yet the result looks effortless. By the 19th century, something begins to change. Sculptors are still highly skilled, but fewer works attempt these extreme illusions. By the 20th century, many of these techniques are no longer seen at the same level. Modern artists can create impressive marble sculptures. They have access to advanced tools, including diamond cutting equipment and digital modeling. But even today, it is rare to see a marble veil that matches the realism of the veiled Christ. So what happened? The common explanation is that artistic styles changed. Marble sculpture became less central as new materials and new art movements appeared. That may be true, but style does not erase capability if a technique exists. It can usually be taught, improved, and passed on. Yet in this case, certain effects seem to disappear rather than evolve. Some researchers suggest that this reflects the fragile nature of artistic knowledge. Skills can be lost if they are not recorded or passed down properly. Others believe the answer may be simpler. The techniques still exist, but they require such extreme patience, skill, and time that few modern artists attempt them. And then there are those who think we may still be missing part of the story, not necessarily something mysterious or hidden, but something not fully understood, because the sculptures themselves remain. They are physical. They can be studied. They can be measured, and they continue to raise the same questions. How were these effects planned so precisely? How were they executed with such consistency? And why do some of these techniques appear so rarely today? Maybe the answer is not that history is wrong, but that it is incomplete. And sometimes, the most important discoveries begin not with answers, but with the decision to look closer at what we thought we already understood.